Good afternoon. Welcome to this program that Matter is doing. I know a number of people are still in the process of joining, but want to make sure we go ahead and get started. For those of you who are familiar with some of our programs, we have something we do called Tales from the Trenches, where we invite seasoned entrepreneurs to really share the stories of their journey. What are the experiences underneath the building of their great businesses? What are the tales from the trenches of entrepreneurship? And we had Prashant Srivastava from Evive, the founder and CEO of Evive, on a few months ago, and he told a terrific story of how he built his business and what all the ups and downs were. As we were thinking recently about the times that we're living in right now and what it means to be an entrepreneur building a business right now and building a business potentially over the next few years, we were interested in finding someone who had built a business through the last recession, and what are the lessons that that he or she would have learned from building that business through 2008 through 2009, the decisions about raising money, about the size of the organization, the challenges about how to manage cash, and the experience that they were having with customers and with sales and with everything else. So it turns out that Prashant started Evive in 2007. And we talked about this a little bit during Tales from the Trenches, but that's really going to be the subject of the conversation today. So he started the business in 2007. 1 year later, the economy went into a free fall, and Evive, fast forward to today, the company has been wildly successful. Has more than 300 people, serving 4 million people around the world. And so we're going to spend this time digging into what are the lessons learned from building a business through that recession? How do they apply to today? And what are the strategies that Prashant is employing today to keep Evive healthy and well through this difficult, challenging and uncertain time? You can ask questions using the chat function, and I will filter through those as we go. So feel free to ask anything along the way, and everyone is muted and your video is off, so you don't have to worry about that. So Prashant, let's jump into it. So you started your business in 2007, 2008, the recession came crashing down on everything. What are the steps that you took at that time to, well, I'm not going to prejudge. What are the steps that you took at that time as you were looking at the future of Evive and the trajectory that you wanted to be on and the reality of the world around you?
Good to join you, Stephen. It's been a long time. I actually talked to our first employee, second employee who was still here today, just as we went back and recollected these tales. One of the things that sort of everyone had to say was that we sort of hunkered down, right? Step one was preparation. It's sort of a defensive strategy. You say, look, you're a startup, you have a limited amount of cash. We had a little bit of revenue. Our first customer was paying us $36,000 a year. We had a second customer signed up for about $200,000 a year, but it was nowhere near what it would take for us to make payroll. And so we knew we had to sort of conserve cash. And so that was sort of preparation number one. We had hired a salesperson as we were starting to scale up. And we asked the salesperson to come on as a consultant part-time rather than full-time, again, sort of conserving cash. And then the second thing after we did that, we'd actually been fortunate to raise about $600,000 just before that happened. So we knew that if we sort of cut, we weren't really drawing much of market wage anyway, Peter and I. We had this consultant So drawing a little bit, we have 5 employees total. And so we knew that we wanted to have enough runway to last 18 months. So cutting our own wages, the consultant and all of that made sure that we were prepared now. No matter what happened, we would make it through. And then we started thinking about sort of the other side of that, like what's going on in the world that we could do differently, that when this sort of passed, we would be better positioned. And so what we decided to do was, again, continue to build new products inside what we had and focus very heavily on preventive and chronic and some other types of messaging that we were doing, rather than try to do many other things that sort of prospective customers were willing to buy. We said, look, we're just going to focus on these things because we feel that other companies are sort of pulling back on R&D much faster, bigger companies. And then when we come out of this, we'll be ahead, and those will become channel partners, or they will rent it from us because now they have sort of a year or 18 months behind of, we have an 18-month head start. And so that, I would call that sort of an offensive strategy to say, look, first you prepare, you make sure you're going to make it on the other side. That's defense. The second part of that is offense. It says, what should you do that when you come out on that side, you're better off, you're ready to go, ready to grow. And so those two combinations sort of stick out to, in my conversations with all our first employees, stuck out as the big key categories of things that we did.
So there's a tension between those. So on the one hand, what I hear you saying is you went into 2008, not surprisingly, saying conserve cash, preserve runway, extend runway, live to fight another day. I think a lot of businesses are going through that calculation, or already have or in the process of. But then you're also saying you're investing, sounds like increasing investment in innovation and product R&D. So how do you balance those?
Well, I would say
things?
like maybe not investing new money. What we did was we just said, look, we're going to take our tech force and we're going to focus it on a narrower set of things, but we're going to build those out much farther. That way, we're not sort of, when you're very early in revenue, you don't have a good product market fit or understanding. You're trying to do many things that early prospects ask for, right? And instead, we said, look, we know we have enough cash to get through, even though we don't convert some of these prospects that could take us off the path. Because all of our first customers are not exactly like, oh my God, we've been waiting for this, we're ready to go. We had to tweak and move it around. And so we sort of said, look, we're going to say no to some of those things because we only have limited bandwidth and we can't expand it, right? Because we're trying to conserve cash. But we're going to put that bandwidth to work on things that we think are going to be the future, where we will be ahead. And so that's the bet, right? Even today, I'm doing sort of the same thing, is saying, look, we're cutting things and doing all of that, conserving cash, but we're investing in our core and focusing on a narrower set of opportunities to make sure that we're getting the most out of our workforce there.
So talk a little bit about some of the similarities and differences between what you saw in 2008 and what you're seeing today.
Yeah, I mean, I would say sort of, the similarities are in terms of what businesses face in terms of decision making, right? So as we go through, and by the way, I feel like we're not in it yet, even though, every company that reported its first quarter earnings the last few weeks you saw had decent results. The last 2 weeks of the first quarter were affected. Some sales may have been affected, but a lot of that was in the pipeline and sort of worked out. The second and third quarters are going to look more like the recession, sort of that 2008 and 9 brought through. And so we're sort of in the early days, but I think the similarities are in terms of corporations pulling back. We suspect that will happen again in terms of spending. So if you're making something that they can live without, they might not be able to live without, something very administrative, they'll be looking for things that are either like completely must have or have an immediate ROI. And so if you're making something that has a slightly longer term ROI or is a little harder to prove, or is something that optimizes the way they do something, but requires new investment from them, those cycles will take longer. You'll still sell it, but it'll take longer. And that's what happened in 2008 is that, as credit markets got tighter and the repercussions happened in the rest of the economy, deals slowed down. It wasn't like we wouldn't sell it at all. We just ended up making a already long enterprise sales cycle much longer, right? Because uncertainty breeds sort of this inertia, right? It says, hey, we're just fine where we are unless we absolutely need it. If we were selling payroll solutions, I guess 2008 wasn't a big problem because you still need payroll, although you're not getting as many new businesses to buy payroll. But you're still hanging on to current customers. They might be smaller. But if you're selling something that's a nice to have, those things become easier to cut and so on. And that's what's sort of going to happen here as the economy tightens, as these results cascade through for the next couple of quarters, that things that are not a must-have will slow down significantly or will experience more churn from existing customers.
So do you think that Evive in 2008 was a must-have product? And no.
Not at all. So in 2008, we started this business messaging people around prevention, the value of getting mammograms, colonoscopies, and so on. And while that's good, right, there are plenty of companies in America that can work without their people remembering every mammogram, every colonoscopy, right? And so again, the sales cycle of those things slow down because they have ROI, there's value in those things, but the ROI is sort of a multi-year problem, right? And so we knew that was going to happen. And that's when I talked about the 18 months of cash runway. We said, look, what we thought was going to last us 6 to 9 months for the next milestone needs to last us 18 months.
So that's how you basically said, instead of assuming that you were going to go out and raise money 6 to 9 months down the road, you said, we need to extend our runway to be twice that, 3 times that,
Correct.
to 18 months.
Correct.
And then how did you know, so you're sitting on a new business, a new product, presume, obviously you don't have a ton of market share, you don't have a lot of market penetration, presumably your brand awareness isn't extraordinarily high at that point because you've barely been on the market. Right. You're sitting on you have a product that is sounds like at the time a nice to have, not a must have. So there's a calculation that I've talked to a number of entrepreneurs who have recently launched their companies and that are going through, and some of them are thinking, should we just pause the whole thing for a period of time until the world kind of, until there's more of a space for it, or should I? And companies are trying to figure out how to do that.
I mean, I think that's a legitimate question that everyone has, and not just in recessions. We have these questions a lot, right? Existential crises in a startup, right? To be or not to be, is this the right one or not? And one of the things I talked about, I think in the Tales from the Trenches to David, was 2 things. One is that entrepreneurs are eternally optimistic, right? So we wouldn't get into this if we thought this was a high probability game. It isn't, right? It's a low probability game. If we looked at all the odds and we were rational, we'd be like, no one in their sane mind does this. And by the way, when I started Evive, I had an 8-month-old baby as well. So you can certify me insane at the same time, right? But I think so. You have to believe in what you're doing, whether it's currently must have, nice to have. These are market timing things. You have to believe that there is a future in this idea, that it is a good idea fundamentally. Perhaps things are slower, but when there is value here that people will want to pay for. If you don't, then that's a different question. I think the second point was that a number of us, and I talked about this in the Tales from the Trenches as well, like I consider myself completely unemployable. So at that point, I said, look, if this is not going to work, I'm going to start something else. And that's sort of a continuation of that first point. If you feel like this isn't a good idea, not just for today, but in general, and you realize that as part of your analysis in a recession or a pandemic, then you can always pivot to something you think that's is better, and you can pivot to it now, right? And so that's sort of always an option as you're trying to find product market fit. You really have to be honest with yourself to say, is this a good idea? And if it's a good idea, just not right this minute for this recession, you can get through that, but you can't get through the fact that you just realize that it's not a good idea.
Yeah. Yeah. So you had conviction in your idea, and so decided to plow forward. You control your burn. You're investing in R&D. How are you deciding? What's the process you go through to figure out? So it's not that you've got, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but mediocre product market fit, and at least for the time, and so you're putting resources into R&D. How did you know what to invest in? Presumably you could have gone 14, probably more than that, 42 different directions with those investments. And how did you prioritize?
So I think the good news is you look, if you have even a single customer or three, we had 5 customers at the time, you have some sense of the market, right? You're listening to them for what they're looking for now. And you're also testing the value of what you're providing as well, right? And so those are sort of, good places to start out. Even today, we're still listening very carefully to customers because we know that the post-COVID world will be different from the pre-COVID world, right? Even if we thought we were doing great before, the world just changed. And the world may have changed permanently, not for 18 months, not until the vaccine arrives. The world may have changed permanently. And so we're listening to our customers on what they need today and what do they see the world like when it comes out. And you can do the same thing for the market in general, right? We're making calls around the market, listening to webinars, listening to expert speakers talk about how the world may have changed permanently. And then ultimately, it's the buck stops here. So I have to make that decision to say, here's what we're going to do based on all of these inputs that we're hearing. And the good news sort of in an agile world is you can take incremental steps. So one of the things we're doing is we're taking the time now to work on making our back end more nimble and more service oriented so that we're ready to do anything of what the world requires. So we know that for sure. Every tech business does refactoring sort of at some rate slowly in the back. We're saying, let's just do it now. Let's just do all of it. Let's pause, do all of it in the next 90 days or whatever we were going to do as much as we can and see if we come out of this. Then in that time, we will have more visibility. We will have more information. And so this stuff can't hurt. It'll only help us. So we're utilizing the time now to do that kind of work, not just on the technology, but on our sales strategy and our marketing, and saying this pause, quote unquote pause, allows us to sort of sit down and do the things that are the launching pads of what could help us tomorrow. And on the technology side, again, while we're servicing our current customers, as we listen to what they're asking for, we're saying, okay, if these things become real trends, what will it take? And does this sort of work that we're doing now prepare us for that as we learn more?
And is that the same thought process and logic flow that you employed in 2008? I realize it was 12 years ago, and I can't even remember yesterday.
We overserved the few customers that we had, right? We said, look, we got to hang on to these guys because otherwise that 18-month plan is not going to be an 18-month plan. So we overserved them, and then we kept talking to them, and then we had all these prospects who were slowing us down. But at the same time, we realized that some of them were partners in the channel, could be channel partners in the future. And so we talked to them and said, look, I know you're not investing yourself, but if we keep building this, is there a future in this partnership, right? And so that as we came out of that, and as customers started approaching them we were better positioned as a supplier already or a partner already in conversation. So we actually earned our first channel partner customer at the end of 2009. So just as things came out and the end customers started buying, the channel started to become more fruitful. Until then, everything was sort of frozen in this uncertainty type situation. Anyways, whether we approached them directly or indirectly didn't really matter.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about sales cycles. So what did, I mean, I realized you had very limited, you had 5 customers at the time.
Yeah.
What was the sales cycle like to get those first 5? And then what was the sales cycle like to get the next 5?
So we didn't earn any new customers between 2008, November of 2008 and November of 2009.
Ouch.
And so we had 5 customers going into this thing. In November of 2009, we had sort of bigger customers and wins starting to happen. And by April of 2010, we had those sort of next 5, but our revenues had gone 3-fold or 5-fold or something like that, right? Because we had this channel that had credibility, could sell on our behalf, right? And so again, the first 5 took the first 18 months of our runway. The first one took the longest, right? There were 2 guys and an idea for the first one. But then, then we had employees, and so we had 5 employees, we were 7 people for the first 5 customers. And then as we got going, then we started sort of hiring again and built up to where we are today. So, if you believe that the market will come around and you have the right product for it, and there's enough green shoots in that 12 months, it wasn't like everybody turned us down in the 12 months. They just didn't make a decision, right? They were talking to us and they kept talking to us. They said, look, we don't have budget allocations or whatever, but it does sound interesting to us. So that's the delay, right? I mean, I don't know what I would do if for 12 months nobody took a meeting. And then I would be questioning the market fit completely. But I think the fact that, and this is where the eternal optimism comes. You're like, wow, so many people are waiting to buy. As soon as they have money, they're going to buy from us. And 12 months goes by, sort of, I used to say we're 1 customer away from making it. And that was sort of the 1 customer away took, 12 extra months.
Yeah. I can picture you walking around the office every night. So we're 1 customer away.
Right. And I don't know how many people in the audience can relate to that, but if you're a small startup with 5 or 7, you always think you're like, we're 1 customer away from making
Absolutely.
it. And we have all these people taking meetings from us. Oh my God, it's gonna happen.
Yeah. Right. And so how did you, your strategy then, how did you continue to engage and manage your sales pipeline at a time when you weren't really moving customer, potential leads through the pipeline? They were just stuck there. So did you employ new sales tactics, different marketing approaches, how did you?
I'll answer this for 2008 and then I'll answer this for 2020, because I think pipeline is sort of generous for a business that has 5 customers. but I think what we did again was, because we had those 5 customers and we overserved them, right? We were always creating proof points that we could go back with, right? So time always creates proof points at customers. So every 3 months you can go back and display new results and show how it's going. So you have sort of this automatic value of time creating sort of proof points, right? And so we kept going back then. And again, it was a little bit different than now, right? Where people were not overwhelmed. Like our buyers are HR buyers, benefits buyers. They were not overwhelmed by the financial crisis. They're actually overwhelmed by the crisis we have now. So they were taking meetings. They just wouldn't buy anything, right? They would be like, okay, this sounds really interesting. Let's keep talking. I'm going to bring in some other people into the circle, or, I'm going to go to the budget committee, and the budget committee meeting went back by a couple months. That kind of stuff happened. In 2020,
I mean, that actually sounds like a normal healthcare buying cycle to me, but
Yeah, it does
you know,
actually. I mean,
it's a,
unfortunately, yeah, that happens now as well. It just was twice as bad. How's that for a
fair
comparison,
enough.
right? But I think like we're sitting now in 2020, right? And people are somewhat overwhelmed. Like our buyers are overwhelmed. Their employees are all remote. Suddenly, they have to figure out how to deliver care to these people when the healthcare system is falling down. And so there we are again focused on providing value to prospects in different ways, right? We obviously can't be cold calling them. We can't. We've dialed back all business development. We've said, look, this is not the time, right? What we have done instead is we have built things that prospects and just the world in general finds value in. So one of the first things we did in the COVID crisis was build Evive.care, which is a website that you can go to and find a testing site if you feel like you have COVID. And we built that because it was very difficult. Like if you felt like you had symptoms, you couldn't find testing. Even today, it's not so obvious that you can just like jump up and go get a test, right? There are all these criteria whether they'll give you a test or not, and there are all these special places where you have to get an authorization from. And so we said, well, how is the world navigating this? And so when we built Evive.care, we consciously chose, we crowdsourced all the data, right? We looked around, we scraped the web, we called every local newspaper in the country and made sure that we had a comprehensive listing. And we launched it on March 19th. It was like 4 days after this thing just sort of went bad, right? But then we made a conscious decision to make it open. We said the world should access this. This is our contribution to the world. But what that allowed our sales folks to do is to reach out to our prospects and just the consultants and channel partners and say, look, this is not about selling. This is not that moment. But we have repositioned our technology to help the world, to help you. You are free to use this. And so that allowed us to just go back in front at least and remind folks that we exist, that we're a great technology business. We use technology for good health. Here's just one example, right? More recently, we took the models for case projections that IHME builds, and we built models on top of that at the county level, because a lot of our customers and companies around the country don't make decisions at the state level. They have employees in each sort of location or county, and they have to decide, like, do we open the store? Do we open the store with a 50% restriction or a 100% restriction? Do we wipe down the handles every 30 minutes, or do we wipe them down every 2 hours? Like, how do we do risk management, right? And business. And so we built a model that provides a 7-day forecast for cases in each county that our customers and the world at large can use in order to decide, at least for this week, what are the restrictions we're going to create. And then next week, we're going to create a new set. But we live week by week, right? So those are the types of things that our marketing team is sort of sending out into the world, just to remind the world that, look, we're a great business that's designed to use technology for good health. But in this moment, we're not about to come sell you our stuff. What we're trying to do is turn our resources into things that everyone can use in the moment that they need it. So we found other ways to stay relevant. Steve, I wouldn't say that we're selling today. I would say that, we're just staying relevant. And we expect that when they have the time of day later, that just staying relevant would have mattered.
And was it obvious to you immediately that your buyers were totally overwhelmed and you should shut down your sales efforts and switch to something like what you just described? Or did you start getting a bunch of data from your BDRs or however your process works that you couldn't get anybody on the phone? Or how did you know that this was the right direction to go?
I think so. Good question. When this is where, like, this is the job of the CEO, right? To look a little bit farther ahead and say where the world might be going or what the world might need. When I looked at sort of this crisis in the first week in March or the second week in March, I was also in the board where I don't know how bad this is going to be. Maybe it's not bad. Maybe it's bad. In hindsight, of course, is 2020. Everybody's like, wow, we should have known this in February or January. And you're like, not so clear at the moment, right?
Yeah.
To take the drastic measures that we took. And so I think for us, BDR rates, I don't know about other people, but BDR rates are pretty low anyway. Like, they don't get a meeting, they don't get even a pickup most times. So I wouldn't count on those. I think what I looked at was on March 13th, when we went to work from home, or when we at Evive went to work from home, I said, like, what's the single biggest thing we would want to know if somebody needed a task, somebody came down with this. And we actually had an employee come down with it that Friday. And we said, wow, this is like a huge problem, this getting this test. And so I called my internal people. I said, look, this is going to be a huge problem. What can we do to help? Because our customers will need this. And so we just went into action. We have a group of people, luckily, that said, look, we're going to just sit down, focus on this over our weekend. We're going to figure it out. Prashant, I'll call you on Monday. And so on Monday, I show up and they're like, look, we found that there's no good way of doing this. There's no central way, but here's what we've done. We've written a web crawler. We've done this, we've done that. And we've collected 500 sites. I said, great, let's put it out there. The decision I had to make was to put it out there in the public, rather than just a private resource that only Evive customers have, etc. And that call was made sort of thinking about, like, if this got bad, our customers, HR benefits folks, would be overwhelmed, and that this would happen. There's never like an exact obvious moment where you're like, wow, I know this. Like, you always make decisions with, partial information, and you're very often wrong if you're in my position. But this one, we said, look, let's just make the decision to make it public, because we think people might need it. And it was just as much sort of displaying our values of who we live in the healthcare community as it was about just Evive as a business that needed to market and all of that.
How are you? So in 2008, obviously you had a very different business. You had 5 customers. How big was your team?
We had 8 employees.
8 employees. Okay. Are there, and today you have almost 300, I think, or something in that neighborhood.
But we had all hands today, and all 286 showed up on all hands. That's why I know it's
286 people.
Zoom counts at the bottom these days, right?
So maybe the question is less about 2008 and more about today. In terms of how are you engaging with your team, and what are the things that are working, and what are the things that you've learned over the last 8 weeks or since March 13th about in 2 areas. One is, and I think, businesses large and small have been, have struggled with how to engage their teams, how to keep everybody aligned with their values, how to, preserve or strengthen a sense of culture, how to keep people motivated and on track in a world like this. And then, so how do you, what are the things that you've done that work really well, and the things that you've learned?
So very early on, between March 13th and April 13th, like that's a 4-week period, I wrote 5 or 6 updates to the company. And all of them were about, like, number one, employees, right? We care about your safety. You're at home, stay connected, talk to other people, hear, engage with us. And then about customers, what we were doing with customers and how we were planning to service them more. And in that process, I also tried to talk, and customers included sort of a view of our business. And I think it was the second or third update where I laid out sort of 3 basic principles that we would operate under. One is transparency. We would tell everybody, what we were thinking about, what we were going to do. 2 was sort of conserving our capacity to delight customers. So continuing to focus on servicing our customers and doing the best job we could. And the third was sort of preserving this ability to innovate in a post-COVID world. So all of those 3 themes I built upon in each note, but it was sort of laid out very early on. I said, look, these are the principles that I'm going to be guided by. And I think people appreciated that over time, because as we made measures, right, that we cut marketing spend, for example, we cut T&E completely because we weren't going to spend some of it anyway. No one's traveling, no one's entertaining. But then we started sort of to do other things. We shut down some product lines. We said, know we were planning on expanding in this direction, but we're going to disband that product team and focus on the core. And so people understood that because those three principles were very clear. Like everything we did mapped to one of those three things, right? And so even when recently we had to do some layoffs, people understood that we had protected our ability to serve customers. We had protected our ability to come and win innovation in the post-COVID world. And so, you know, while they were, and I'd asked them previous to that to know that sometimes the decisions I make are not obvious. Like I will have to make decisions early. It's sort of like ordering 100,000 ventilators and you would only need 10,000, but you don't know it. But it'd be worse if you needed 50,000 and ordered 10, right? And so I laid out these things, and then that value of transparency I can't sort of stress enough because people want to know the truth. Like even if it's bad, like people want to know the truth. Like today we had an all hands and we talked about all of those things. And I think the feedback I got was like, it was that we had a lot of transparency about what we were doing around customers, what was happening in sales. We transparently shared across the company so that people feel connected. They feel connected, that they're being given the truth, right? And also it relieves anxiety. Like a lot of people may be worried about their jobs, their businesses they work for, etc. And to give them sort of a totally rosy picture, not helpful. To give them gloom and doom, also not necessarily helpful. Because we don't know, right? The uncertainty window is so big, we don't know. But to give them some realism along with some, you know, specifics around what we're doing and why we are optimistic about the future, I think is the balance that we all walk, right? Because you have credibility because you provide the unvarnished truth. And whether that's good or bad depends on the day, but I think we've learned that that's true. The other thing, one of my co-founders did early on was he started a Friday happy hour. And it's sort of like drinking in your own house with a bunch of friends on radio. But that has had like, you know, half our company shows up at that. It's sort of informal. He also started sort of a at-home fitness challenge where people post pictures of them doing yoga and exercise. But it's just all of those sort of keep us together and connected. These are not like pre-planned efforts, but I think in hindsight, those are the types of things we have done more of since then. And we have departments now doing happy hour. Because a lot of our people are single, they live by themselves. We have people who live in high-rise buildings, they don't even see anybody else because they don't go downstairs. And so just people taking care of other people virtually by connecting with them after work, you know, I sent meals to a few people's homes. Alinea, which is a very famous restaurant in Chicago, has a $40 meal right now that you can get 3 courses from Alinea. And I just bought it, picked it up, sent it to a few people's homes. And we had like a virtual employee dinner with the CEO and his wife and little kid and all of that, right? All of that has become sort of normal, right? I mean, like I should apologize if my 20-month-old sort of decides to do nursery rhymes in about 10 seconds, but that's become normal. Like our work and our lives have become sort of all intertwined. So just getting to do all of those things, I think has helped us keep the Evive spirit together. I can't tell you how many people after all hands today called me and said, I'd love to go back to the office. And I'm like, you know, we're good for a while. I would love to go back to the office too. I think everybody who has children is thinking, oh my God, I gotta go to the office now. But love my children, but can't work with them in this place. But everybody's sort of experiencing that stress in different ways, right? Single people experiencing sort of this isolation, married people somewhat thinking there should be some isolation, but there isn't. It's sort of a continuous world. And in those times, all I ask the company, even today, to do is sort of take care of themselves. We encourage staycation today. We said vacation is not always outside. Like just shut down and staycate, watch Netflix, veg out on popcorn. It's fine with us. I also encourage people to seek professional help today. I have a personal therapist. We have a family therapist. And I said, look, you know, everyone should reach out and get help if you feel like you're getting overwhelmed. And then I check on people, just, you know, I randomly call 5 employees every day and just check in on them, or on Slack and check in on them. So I mean, I think at the end of the day, employees, most employees feel connected when you genuinely care about them. And I think deliberately making an effort to show them that now more than ever is important.
And are there, obviously the contours of this crisis is quite different from the contours of 2008. And obviously going to an office wasn't an issue then. Did you learn about transparency or any of the other fundamentals that you're applying today during that crisis?
Well, I think it's been sort of at the core of our company, right? If your startup goes long enough, I feel like transparency is the thread that always remains, because these people are sort of battle tested. They expect that level of, there is a level of trust that sort of transparency upholds. And so we, about 2013, we sort of coined all this stuff into what we call the Evive way, just to make sure that people coming later would deliberately be upheld to that. So our recognition program, for example, we announced a new recognition program today. We got a new piece of software that plugs into Slack, but it's around those Evive way values. So people recognizing peer-to-peer recognition using Slack, this is what we're all on now, on those values, again, reinforces the fact that we really live those values, that we keep them. And so we're lucky, my co-founder, Peter Services, sort of how we get there is just as important as getting there. And so the how we get there is the Evive way. And we've sort of, I'm glad we coined it formally in 2013. That allowed us, again, to have this language where we can always go back and say, hey, remember, transparency is one of those values.
I want to remind everyone, if you have questions that you'd like Prashant to address, please use the chat feature in the webinar, and I'll work through those as they come in. So the world 6 months from now or 2 years from now is unlikely to look like the world looked 6 months ago. And none of us really have, I don't think, a good grasp on what that's going to look like. Presumably, some of those changes could have a meaningful impact on your business.
Mm-hmm.
How are you predicting or preparing or making sure that you either don't make the wrong decisions now that set yourself up for failure later, or you're unprepared, or there's just, you could drive yourself crazy creating 100 different scenarios, which you're probably not doing, but maybe you are.
No, we created sort of a pessimistic case and a worst case and stopped at that.
That's exactly what we did.
That was sort of our, the worst case is what I call preparation, and we're prepared for that. We have runway to 18 months, we're ready to go. And now we're sort of looking forward to the future. And like I said, we have a lot of customers. Our customers are thought leaders in HR, leading companies in the world, FedEx, UPS, etc. And so we're talking to them about like how they're dealing with this. What do they see their needs are? Where are gaps that our technology can fill? So for example, today, as people think about return to work, they're thinking about the readiness of each site. Well, if we're the handheld app on every employee, we can use this channel to solicit feedback on where things are missing, right? And so customers are saying, look, in the past, they didn't have to keep track of, does every restroom have hand sanitizer? Right? Is every cleaning service showing up on time at every location? Right? But in the future, like in the foreseeable future, that's gonna happen, right? We're gonna have to start keeping track of like, how much PPE do we have beside each door? And when it runs out, And if you're a large company like Home Depot, that's a huge problem. If you're a large company like Gap, customers are using PPE also. And so these are the things that we're saying, like, how can we, in the past, we've been all about big data and pushing people towards health. And now this concept of sort of employee health benefits has extended into operations. Employees' health matters to operations. Right? Earlier, a diabetic walks in and the diabetic is struggling and the company wants to help the diabetic, and the diabetic also treatment costs money, so we want to keep him healthy. All of that was true. Now a person with coronavirus walks in, now it's an operational issue because the diabetic is not contagious, but this guy is. And so we're trying to talk to customers about how can the fact that we live on every handheld, that we can get messages to people faster than anybody else, to any type of people, right? So we have a hotspot outbreak in a little town in New York. How can we tell people at that location that that's happening? And so we're sort of rapidly collecting that feedback and saying, can we extend our functionality relatively easily to help these use cases that are emerging and help our customers. And that sort of holds, again, if we can help our customers now that we have a lot of them, that we can help our future customers with those same ideas.
And are you investing now to build out those solutions, or are you more collecting the ideas and?
No, so look, good question. Again, this is moving so fast, right? That we don't have the time to like know that these are exactly the types of things that are happening. Now, the good news for us is that we have all of the basic functionality. We have sort of question answer, we have notifications, we have two-way texting inside our apps. So it's sort of just like configuring it a little bit differently than it was in the past and extending it. It's not sort of like, oh my God, we used to do X and now we have to do Y. It's sort of like we used to do X and we can keep doing X, but if we do X plus a little bit, 0.002, then we can be more relevant today and help our customers. And so that's sort of what we're doing, and incrementally growing with the customer, right? And saying, okay, what other needs are out there and that we can extend the platform to? Where is that valuable? And so that's the beauty of having many more customers now is they're telling you what they're struggling with and where they might look to you to solve that problem. And some of those are temporary and some of those will be permanent, right? Some of these problems are temporary, but some of these may become permanent needs.
So you're obviously listening to your customers, which is a good thing for any business in any time. Who else do you listen to and do you go to for advice? And is it any different now than it was a few months ago?
Yes and no. So again, we have a board which has been very insightful. They have seen this pattern before, right? I've only seen 2008, but these guys have seen, 1988 or 89 when I was like in fourth grade or something. So they've seen, they have a lot of battle scars here and around the world. So when they tell us something, we sort of listen, right? And we don't question it. It's sort of like, when Waze tells me to go a certain way, I try to not question that too much, even if I know my way around the city. So, there's some element of trust there between the board and us, our investor and us. And we make sure, again, when they said to us, prepare early, I'm telling you, we said, look, it feels early. These are difficult decisions, but we agree. Let's do that. And that was a huge relief because now we can look forward. We don't have to worry about what, 22 projections of in between cases. We have the worst case, we're ready, we're good to go. So that was sort of, that's the biggest thing. We meet every Thursday now just to check in, not to go through the board deck and all of that, but just check in. On the business side, because this is sort of an area where we're like really in the front line as software, not as people, we've sort of started talking to a lot of specialists. So we had sort of the head of infectious disease at North Shore Hospital, which is a big local hospital system, talk to us and our customers about where he sees the future. Because our people listening to an expert like that, right? He's been talking about infectious disease for like 37 years. And only now, it's sort of Anthony Fauci and then Anthony Fauci Jr. are now being heard because this is the time, right? And so as we listen to him, we're thinking about like, how will technology help this day? He's talking about everyone needing to have an infection control program, right? About cleaning, about more air ventilation, social distancing, all of those things. And as we listen to him, we're thinking about how can we help this? And so that's sort of what I would call subject matter advice that has become more critical, right? We're listening to workers' compensation people who are saying, look, this is a huge problem. If we open up too early and people fall sick, will we have workers' comp? Is this workers' comp? Like, is this occupational health hazard? And so we're thinking about like, how do we help that, right? How do we help keep better records of, like we did have PPE that day everywhere, and all of that will be required in that space, right? So that's where we're now relying on experts in the field. We consider ourselves experts on technology, but we listen to our customers as they are experts in their businesses and needs, and then these types of experts who are experts in the domain, so that we can merge technology with domain expertise and business need together, and hopefully create a lasting sort of business out here. Does that make sense?
It does. Go back to your board for a minute. What is the ideal board member during this kind of a crisis? I mean, how often does your board normally meet?
We meet every quarter.
Every quarter, and now you're meeting every week. So you don't really want the board deep in the day-to-day and in the weeds. So what is the ideal? Describe the ideal board member in this situation.
That's a great question. So, it's hard. I would be sort of, look, on another day, I would say we want board members who just advise us on strategy and help us vet ideas every quarter, right? but these are the days where you have to listen to like the canary in the coal mine board member, the guy who's like always making sure that your blind spots are covered. He's always telling you things that you probably don't want to hear all the time, and sort of pay special attention, right? I was talking to another CEO, and he was telling me that he has a board member who, like mid last year, was saying, "This recession is coming. You've got to go raise money. Recession is coming." And he convinced everybody else, and he took his advice, raised a bunch of money. And lo and behold, even though the recession came in a different way, like another recession, I think that's a valid point. Like it could have come, even minus the coronavirus. The economy was slowing in some various ways, right? And so I think this is where like all board members are valuable because they bring a variety of ideas to the table. I think I would say the only bad ones are the ones that get stuck on their own idea and are sort of expecting you to follow it, but luckily we don't have those. I think we have a very open conversation, tough oftentimes, we have differences. But I think those help us make better decisions. Like, left to myself, I would not have been as fast about preparation because you also see all these people every day. We made some cuts and that's not easy, but just sort of having other people validate that pattern and say, look, this is the right thing to do. You have to prepare early. Sort of gives me the impetus to do it, right? And the perspective on like this is super important for the remaining 300 people here.
Yeah. So we have a few minutes left. I just have probably one other question. On a personal level, how are you? This is a very stressful situation for most people. I've seen things like my own dreams are just totally bizarre. And then it turns out like everybody's having totally bizarre dreams. And it's a really weird, uncertain, sort of disconcerting time for a lot of people. You're in a position where you're a CEO, you've got 300 people working for you. There's a lot of additional stressors. How are you, for the other sort of CEOs and people who are looking for tips on how to keep themselves sane in this environment? So other than taking this meeting from a flower bed, how are you, how are you keeping yourself healthy and well through all of this?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, I think all CEOs are built this way. Like we give to other people and we don't worry about ourselves a lot. And, I'm married to a therapist who reminds me that the way I can be there for other people is that I take care of myself. So one of the things I started doing about 3 weeks ago when I realized that we were going to be in this for a while and my couch had a little depression from me sitting on it in the same spot all day, is that I could do some of these meetings walking around. So now I'm averaging about 20,000 steps of just walking around my neighborhood, which is pretty sparsely populated and nobody's on the streets. So I'm not violating any distancing orders or any of that. But it allows me to get out there, get some fresh air. And even when it's freezing, it was not that good yesterday. I still did it just because I think it's a good outlet to get out there a little bit. It also gets us out of the house. So like, we're a very loving family, but we've been here for 6 weeks on each other, on top of each other. and our family therapy, we have family therapy now that we do via the telephone or via telehealth, via Zoom. So we've continued that weekly. And so we get to talk about like the new things that are coming up because we are in this space all the time, right? Otherwise, I'm gone to the office. We have a little overlap in the evenings that everybody's sort of eager to tell each other about what happened. And now we're here all day, right? I'm no longer as exciting to my kids as I was before because I'm here all day, right? And so I think family therapy has been really helpful. I actually started a new personal therapist inside this crisis. I was a little bit hesitant about doing that for the first time with telehealth. Like if I had a therapist I'd already been going to, I would be comfortable going on Zoom. But I finally said, look, these times are super stressful, and I need to be able to have someone that looks out for me and tells me when I'm over my own head. Because oftentimes we're so busy in the moment that we're solving problems. We're on every front: home, grocery, office, layoffs, business, all of it, all at the same time, and you forget to look out for yourself. And so that therapist's role is to make sure that I'm looking out for my own self when I'm exhibiting signs of strain and not recognizing them myself. So that's sort of been my modus operandi. I love talking to people, so that's why I said I told you I call employees every day, talk to them, checking up on them, but just as much as it helps me because social interaction. These are my friends, co-workers. For most of us, a lot of our people in our lives are co-workers and friends.
Well, Prashant, thank you very much for doing this. Really interesting. You clearly have learned a lot, whether it's directly from 2008 or along the way. Really appreciate all the insights that you provided, and wish you not only to you and your family stay healthy and well, but best of luck to Evive as you navigate through this pandemic and beyond. And thank you to everyone who joined us for this program.
Thanks, Steve. And if anyone wants to get in touch with me, I know it's sort of a lonely place being the CEO sometimes. I'm happy to share anything you want to know about.
Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon.